Alright, in this lesson we're going to be talking about V-speeds. Now this is out of all the lessons, this is going to be one of the ones you definitely want to pay attention to, because this is, unfortunately, this is kind of what fails check ride sometimes. If you don't know the V-speeds of your own aircraft or understand why the V-speeds are that airspeed, or what is a VX, what is VY, what does that even mean, you probably shouldn't be going up for your check ride, and the examiner will definitely quickly pick up on that. And unfortunately, I have known many students that have failed the check rides because they weren't aware of their V-speeds. So we're going to start with the airspeed indicator. Don't judge my Picasso skills. I know it's like the best airspeed indicator that you've ever seen in your entire life. Okay, maybe too much. Now, I didn't have any yellow markers, but this is a yellow range right here. It's called the cautionary range, which we'll get into in a minute. But I wanted to start from top down. So this is going to be from top, you're going to see temp C, so temperature in Celsius. So there's different types of airspeeds. There's indicated airspeed, there's calibrated airspeed, and there's true airspeed, and there's other airspeeds. We're not going to get too much into that right now. But what I do want you to understand is the temperature can actually affect the true airspeed. So indicated airspeed is typically, all that is what your airspeed indicator is indicating. It's very simple, right? That's what indicated airspeed is. And you can tell what it is when you're reading it by KIAS. That's in knots. So indicated airspeed. We have another one called calibrated airspeed, and this is indicated airspeed, but it's corrected for instrumentation errors. For example, our pitot tube reads our airspeed with the help of our static port. So I'm gonna draw a pitot tube. Let's say I'm gonna draw it right here. There's our pitot tube hanging off of our wing. Now when the pitot tube is straight and level and it's going through the wind, it's getting all of this reading. It's very accurate. It's getting all of that air input right in there, right? It's very accurate. However, due to instrumentation errors, let's say the wing actually has an angle of incidence, and even though it's going straight forward, let's say we had our angle of incidence, let's say right here, our pitot tube is no longer going directly into the wind. It's actually up at an angle. So the pitot tube may not be getting that much airflow into the pitot tube to get that accurate reading. That's going to be the calibrated airspeed that you're going to be reading, especially when you're doing slow flight. Not all that air is going to be going into the pitot tube, so the pitot tube might actually be reading less airspeed than you're actually going. This right here is called your calibrated airspeed. Now true airspeed looks like KTAS, and that's for your true airspeed. Now true airspeed is calibrated airspeed corrected for non-standard temperatures. But if you want to know exactly what your true airspeed is right at the moment, what temperature you have, first of all, you're going to read up here. You're going to see temperature right up here. And in order to adjust this, there's a little knob right here on your lower left of your airspeed indicator. Once you move that, you're going to adjust this little window up here. Now, if you zoom in a little bit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit. So next time you get in your plane, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about here. There is a 30 plus. I don't know if you can see that. Is that in the camera? I want to be able to I'm actually going to zoom in a little bit here so you can see it just a little bit better, so you can see what I'm talking about here. Let me go ahead and zoom right back in. Okay, there we go. All right, so we have 30 plus, and over here we have 30 minus. And inside of this window, you'll see little lines, and obviously this is going to be probably 0 in the middle. And you'll see lines right here. You'll say, let's say this is 1,000. This line right here is 1,500 and 2,000, but for simplicity, let's just make this 2,000 feet. And let's say we're actually cruising at 2,000 feet, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna find out what the temperature is at our altitude. And how we're gonna figure that out, if you look on the left side of your airspeed indicator, you're gonna see a little window right here, at least on the Cessna 172s. It's gonna be like a little clock. Well, on top of that clock, there's a little button. If you press that button, it'll switch from clock to stopwatch to temperature in Fahrenheit and temperature in Celsius. So let's say you press that button and you're reading, I don't know, 15 degrees Celsius, right up there. So up here, we have 0 and 30. So obviously 15 is gonna be somewhere in the middle. So if we're at 2,000 feet and it's 15 degrees Celsius, what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to take that little knob, twist that little knob until the 2,000 line is underneath your positive 15 degrees Celsius. Now make sure that it's on the positive side, because I know it's kind of backwards because we're thinking that this is going to be negative and this is going to be positive since we read from left to right. But over here is going to be the positive number. So twist that knob until it looks something like this. So then this is going to be 1,000 and this is going to be 2,000. Horrible handwriting. 2,000, 3,000. 4,000, and so on and so forth. So move that dial until it's at 2,000 here. Now when this is aligned, you're going to read your accurate numbers down here. So let me zoom back out. We have understood that. Now what we're going to be going is, so when you move these numbers up here, this is also going to adjust too. So let's say if you are going 120 knots, well, your true airspeed is read down here. So you're actually going true airspeed of, let's say, it looks like in this scenario it would be maybe 126 knots, true airspeed. So that's what this dial is for, and that's how you work that. And just if you're wondering, where is your outside air temperature gauge or sensor? That's actually right there on the top of your wing. That little metal post right there, we are actually on the top of the wing. This little bubble here is a GPS. So if you ever seen one of those, that's your GPS. But yes, we are literally on top of the wing right now. And these are our communication antennas. But yeah, that is going to be your outside air temperature sensor right there. Now this is what I was talking about right here. So I'm actually going to turn on the master again one more time. Hopefully I don't kill the battery in this thing. So as you can see right there, so 24, that's the voltage that I'm getting. So if I press that, now it's reading, so it's 76 degrees today here in Florida, but that's in Fahrenheit. So if I press that one more time, it says 24 degrees Celsius. So now let's move over here, and I'm going to, let's say we're at 2,000 feet again. So remember, see the little 2 right there? So I'm going to move that 2 right under 24 Celsius. I'm going to turn off my battery since I don't need that anymore. So I'm going to move 2. So again, there is about, let's see, so that's 10, 20, 30. So 24, I'm going to move the 2 right underneath. So there's let's see, 2,000, there's 10, 20. So 24 is like right about there, I guess. Now I can read my true airspeed underneath here. So if I'm going 120 knots indicated right here, 120 knots indicated, and that means my true airspeed is going to be around 128 knots-ish, or 127 knots-ish. So that is how you read the true airspeed indicator. Now moving on to the V-speeds. So how I always remembered my V-speeds is to put them in order. You can get your V-speeds in your POH chapter 2, and it'll literally give you every single V-speed for your particular aircraft. So we're going to start out with the V for velocity, max crosswind. So according to our POH in the Cessna 172, the max crosswind component is 15 knots. Now moving on down, our VSO. What is VSO? VSO is the slowest speed that your aircraft can actually fly, maintain altitude with its dirty configuration, meaning the gear is out, the flaps are down, and everything like that. And that's going to be 40 knots. Let me actually write it over here. There you go, you can see it a little bit better. 40 knots. So but how can I remember this? Because this one is the same exact thing, but with the gear up, the flaps up, and everything like that, and that's called clean configuration. Obviously that the gear doesn't really matter because in a Cessna there is no gear down or gear up, the gear is always down anyway. But just to help you remember the difference between VSO and VS is we have a little airplane right there. Remember, VSO is full landing configuration, right? So I'm gonna put my flaps down right here. I'm going to put my gear down. Here's my gear. Here's my front gear down here. Now, what if I just put a... That's how I at least remembered that VSO. The O is kind of like part of the landing gear. So if the landing gear is down, that means the flaps are down, getting ready to land. So that's the easiest way for me that I remembered what the difference between VSO and VS. Now, VS is going to be 48. Again, you can find this chapter 2 in the, or section 2 in the POH, and you can also kind of look at your airspeed indicator, and you can see 40. That's would be where the white line kind of like just kind of would stop, and then because the white line represents the flaps. This is our flap range right here. This white line right here, and then this green is just the normal operating range. This is the normal green range right here. So 48 is VS, the slowest at which the aircraft can maintain altitude and fly with all the flaps up and the gear up and the clean configuration. So right here, that's where your VS, that's where your green arc would normally start right there. Because anything slower than that, you're going to need your flaps. So VS is going to be 48, VR is going to be 55. Now, about VRs. Why do we have a VR? If we just said the aircraft can actually take off and fly at 40 knots as long as we have our flaps down, or let's say if we don't even have our flaps down, let's have our flaps up in clean configuration, we can actually fly going at 48 knots. But why do we have to speed up to go 55? It all has to do with ground effect. Now, what we learned about ground effect, well, let me go back a little bit. What we learned about induced drag is it was a product of lift, right? So let's go ahead. This is going to be our ground effect, and we have our airplane coming in. Now, as we have lift, let's say that we have our, and this is just the same as putting our hand out the window and we're getting lift, right? Well, when we have lift, we have that product of, we have that lift-induced drag pulling us backwards. And as we're pushing as the wing is pushing the air downwards, that lift-induced drag is also going downwards as well. So in the air, literally, our adverse yaw, our lift-induced drag is literally just going downwards like this. However, what happens when we're so low to the ground that the ground actually interferes with that lift-induced drag? So if we have our plane, coming in, and now we're in this range. So let's say our wings are right here, and we have this drag. Well, over here we have a bunch of drag. So we got drag. So we got all this lift-induced drag that's acting upon the aircraft, the more lift that we have. However, once we're getting down toward the ground, the aircraft's not going to be dealing with all of this drag. Why? Because the ground is actually interfering with that drag. So if we have a less lift-induced drag, that's why your airplane performs so much better when it's within ground effect. So that is why our airplane likes to float, especially in the 172. She just likes to float and float and float. If you have a little bit of power in there, you'll be surprised at how long she'll just float all the way down the runway. So that's why the airplane performs a little bit better in ground effect, because the ground is taking away some of that drag, right? So let's say that we do take off at VSO, or let's say VS. So we're at 40 knots, we're between 40 and 48 knots. Sure enough, we can rotate, but you gotta think we're in ground effect. So our performance is gonna be a lot better. So of course, sure, we can go ahead and take off of the ground. However, as soon as we leave ground effect, which is typically one wingspan away from the ground. So if you take your airplane and you tilt it up like this, from the ground to the top of the wing, that's how much ground effect typically how high the ground effect typically is. So as soon as we leave ground effect, we no longer have that extra performance that we did down here. Now we have all that drag, that lift-induced drag, pulling us down. So now we went from a really great performance to a decreased performance. And what do you think is going to happen if we're only going that slow? Well, we're going to be going up, which is really nice, and then right here, the airplane's not going to really perform all that well, and possibly maybe go right back down to the runway. However, if we speed up to our VR speed, our rotate speed of 55, the airplane would be going so fast, it wouldn't even need the help of ground effect. So when we are out of ground effect, the aircraft can continue to climb with no problems. That's why we have a VR. That's why every aircraft will have a VR, and they will change depending on whatever aircraft and how much power you have in your aircraft. Next is going to be VX. This is the best angle of climb, which is going to be 62. We're going to skip glide for now. We're going to go back to glide, but what I want to cover is VX and VY. VY is going to be 74. These are your climb speeds. So the VX is going to be, let's say that this is the ground right here, and if you are going down the runway and you pitch up just a little bit, you're going to be going really fast that way, but you're not going to be climbing up that much, are you? What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to keep pitching back and keep pitching back and keep pitching back, and you can actually pitch for a certain airspeed that you're going to be wanting. If you have, for example, an obstacle that you have to clear, like you have a big old pole at the end of the runway, and as soon as you rotate, you have to pitch back the best angle of climb for that aircraft. That is your VX speed, and that will typically look like this. You have your aircraft, and it's going to go way up like this. Now, if you try to climb any steeper than this, you're literally just fighting gravity, and your airplane is literally going to be going slower and slower and slower and slower and slower until it stalls, and then you're going to be stalling. That's one thing you don't want to be doing right when you're taking off. So when you're taking off, you can pitch for a certain airspeed, which is VX. That's going to be the safest climb speed for the steepest angle of climb. The next is going to be your VY. Now this is going to be your best rate of climb. So it's not as necessarily as aggressive as the VX, but you can actually pitch the nose down a little bit. And of course, if you're going at 62 and you got full power, well, what do you think is going to happen if you pitch down the nose a little bit? You're going to start speeding up, right? Well, that's exactly what's going to happen here. That's why the VY is actually a little bit higher than VX. And that's that rate, that's that pitch that you're aiming for. When you take off, please try to maintain at least between, if you're taking off in a 172, you might want to stay within the VY or maybe 75 knots-ish. Why? Because let's say if you are climbing out at 80 knots or 85 knots, and I see this happen all the time right after takeoff. Now remember what I was saying, the lower the nose is, the faster you're going to be going, right? So let's lower the nose a little bit and let's climb at 80 knots. So here's our 85 knot climb right here. So here's 62, here's 74, and here's 80. Okay? Now let's say, for example, we have an engine failure right here. You're taking off, and you're at VX. You're taking off, and boom, engine failure. You have all of this altitude to think of what you need to do. You may have enough altitude to actually turn back around, and you may be able to land back on the runway. 74, not as much altitude as VX, but you still may have enough altitude to think what you're going to do, shut down the aircraft, land straight ahead, pitch for glide, and do your emergency checklist while you're before you touch the ground. However, if you're here at 80 knots, I mean, you're literally at the treetops. I mean, you're screwed. You screwed yourself. You don't have enough time to do anything right here at 80 knots. So use your airspeed to your advantage when you're climbing out. So again, climb out, rotate is going to be 55, and then pitch for either 62 for maximum performance climb if you're trying to climb any obstacles, or you can pitch for 74, 75 knots for VY. I say 74, 75 because it's much easier to pick, you know, 60, 65, 70, 75. It's much easier to just line it up right there rather than trying to go, yeah, I'm gonna guesstimate 74 is like right around there-ish. It's 75 will be fine. However, on your check ride, make sure you try to get as close to 74 as possible. So that is your VX and VY. Now, glide is your best glide. Now, typically, depending on which model 172 you have, your best glide could be 68 knots, it could be 65 knots. Just check out your POH to find that information. For here, I'm just going to put 65 for our glide speed for today. VFE is going to be your flap extended speed. Now, for the 172 on your flaps, it looks kind of like this. Here's your little lever right there, and here's this little white little dot there, and there is a range here, and there. So this is going to be your 10 degree, 20 degree, and your full flaps is going to be 30 degrees. This right here, you're going to see a number. You're going to see a number that says 110. Here you're going to see 85. For this first notch of flap, you can actually put your first notch of flaps within below 110 knots. So even though it says, oh, the flap range is only the flap range is only the white arc here. Typically for the 172s, you can actually put down your first notch of flaps if you're below 110 knots, and that's what this little 110 is indicating right there. And then for the second notch of flaps for 20 degrees and 30 degrees, you do have to be within that 85 flap range, which is indicated by this white arc right here. You definitely don't want to overspeed your flaps, that's for sure. So also, when you notice, if you put the flaps down, you'll see a little white little knob that's sticking out, and if you move the flaps down, it'll indicate on which level the flaps are at. So I'll show you what it looks like here in a minute. Alright, so we're looking at the flap lever, which is right there. Let's see if my camera, there we go. And as you can see, that knob right there is what is literally like a flap indicator, what your flaps are at. So I'm going to turn on the master, and I'm actually going to put the flaps down the first notch, and you can see in there the 110 in there. So I'm going to put the flaps down one, and you see how that knob is moving, and there it is. And again, you don't want to be putting these flaps down if you're over 110 knots. And as you can see down here, it's 85. So make sure you're below 85 before you go to flaps 20. As you can see, just move the flap lever over and then down, and that's your second notch of flaps. And then full, just push it all the way down, and there's your full notch of flaps. And you can go ahead and always verify too, when you do put down your flaps, to visualize that your flaps are coming down both left and right. Now I'm going to put the flaps back up. So put the flaps back up. You literally just go ahead. There we go. Normally you just put the flaps, you just flip them right back up, and there's that little knob moving up, as you can see. And when the flaps are all the way up, there they go. And then of course, again, you can visualize, you can check to the right and check to the left, and the flaps are back all the way up. So that is your VFE. So it's going to be between 110 and 85. Good. Now, VA. We'll get back to VA in a second, so let's skip that for now, and let's go to VNO. VNO, for simplicity, VNO is literally your NO, normal operating range. So this is going to go all the way up to 129. Now this is where the green arc is going to stop and your yellow arc is going to begin. So all of this is your normal operating range. It's going to go all the way up to 129 knots. Now be careful, don't get the true airspeed confused, it's only going to be your indicated right here. So 129, that is where your yellow arc will start. So 129. Between 129 in your never exceed speed, which is 163. Let me get my red marker here. Never exceed that, because you're going to end up having some kind of structural damage to your aircraft if you ever go faster than that. But in between 129 and 163 is going to be a yellow cautionary range. You only want to be in that airspeed if you're only within smooth air, and that's also, you can check that out in the POH, whatever your normal operating limitations are for your aircraft. So this is literally all the V speeds except for VA. VA is going to be your maneuvering speed, and we'll get to that right now. All right, so we're going to finish this off with the VA, or maneuvering speed. So what these wing foils are at a side angle, so just like this. So this one, let's go ahead and start with this one. If you have a wing with 2,500 pounds, well, I mean, not the wing, but the airplane is carrying 2,500 pounds. I mean, it's a very heavy airplane. So it is going, in order to go forward, it's going to start nosing down because it's so heavy. So how do I get back up? Well, I have to increase my angle of attack a little bit, right? So I can keep on going forward. That's actually what's demonstrated here. Notice how our angle of attack is actually up a little bit more because it's so heavy. If we were to be straight like this, it would eventually just start going down and down and down. So that's why this is up like this. However, if a wing does not have this much weight, it doesn't need that extra angle of attack to go straight. It can actually go just straight, almost with zero angle of attack, and that's what is that's what's shown here. Now, every wing, no matter the airspeed, no matter what airspeed you're going to, if you breach the critical angle of attack, you can actually stall the aircraft. If you're going, let's say 60 knots, you can actually stall the aircraft if you're going 80 knots. How? Well, all you have to do is breach that critical angle of attack. Every wing was designed to be able to fly until it reaches its critical angle of attack. When that happens, the air will actually spoil over the wing. It'll lose its, the air flow will separate from the wing, and then you have a result of a stall. So now that we understand this concept so far, the point of the VA maneuvering speed is so you can be at a certain speed that, depending on the weight of your aircraft, that will allow you to take the controls and do a full motion back or full left or full right without damaging the aircraft. In fact, you'll actually stall before you do any kind of structural damage to the aircraft if you were to take the nose and go straight down, or to take the yoke and pull it back all the way up and try to do as sharp as possible. You literally would stall first. So how does the weight actually relate to this? If the angle of attack is actually closer to the critical angle of attack, if we were to take the yoke and we were to go full back, notice the distance the wing would have to travel before it's going to stall anyway. So due to this, we can actually go a little bit faster. So let's say our maneuvering speed is, let's say 110 knots. Let's say 110. We can be going fast, but as soon as we pull back all the way, we're not going to cause that much damage, because even though we're going 110 knots, we're going to reach the critical angle of attack like that and stall the aircraft anyway. However, let's say if we're going 110 knots in this scenario. Now we're going 110 knots, we're barreling, we're really light, and let's say we go and pull that back. If we pull that back, we may get to probably right around here before we end up breaking something. The wing strut may give way or something like that. You're not going to be able to stall before you break something in this situation. So what we have to do is we have to slow down the aircraft a little bit. So let's actually put this back to, let's say 95 knots or whatnot. Now that we're going slower, we can actually pull back. We're not going to have that much stress in the aircraft because we're going a little bit slower. We don't have that much wind going by the airplane, and then we will be able to reach all the way up here, and then we'll stall if we're going at 95 knots. So that's why the lighter you are, your VA will actually be less, versus if you're a heavier, your VA will allow you to go a little bit faster. So again, when you're practicing these maneuvers, steep turns, it's best to be at VA, your maneuvering speed, because in case you do have to make an abrupt movement, you're going to stall the aircraft before you actually make any kind of any damages like that. So again, you can find all of this information in your POH. Look in section 2, you're going to find all your V speeds, and on top of that, you're going to find VA, and then you're going to have you're going to see something like pounds here, X, 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 and then over in this column, you're going to have a speed, a VA speed. So this is going to be, due to this, you can go to 110. At this pounds, you can be at 100. At this pounds, you can be at 90 or 95 or whatnot. You can find that in the POH. So that way you can understand what you're looking at when you're looking at the VA speeds.